Thank you so much. Thank you so much, and welcome everyone. It's so great to see, well, I can't say see the faces, but I do see a lot of friendly names in the audience, and it's really wonderful. Thank you all for joining. I know it's from all over the United States and perhaps even beyond that, different time zones. Thank you all. I really appreciate that. So without further ado, shall we get started? Let me see if I can figure out how to, here we go. So even though there was already a great initial introduction of myself, I do have this introduction slide now that we're recording for those who will join in later to watch this on demand. I have been around for quite a while. I started out on the operations side, moved over to business development side. I worked for some large companies. I worked for some small companies in my career. And then I ended up starting my own company, Smart BD Consulting, almost 10 years ago. And it's been growing ever since. We now have over 170 consultants and over 70 federal government contracting clients. We've been fortunate to be able to help our clients with a lot of wins. And we have a really, really high customer return rate, which is the one metric that I always keep and feel is meaningful for my business and really speaks volumes as far as the quality of services that we offer. Having said that, why should you all listen to me? And that's what I really like to focus when I'm showing this slide. And bottom line, not only do I teach classes and I do these talks and I manage my business, but I'm actually still doing work. I actually still support active captures. I am still in the proposal virtual war rooms to date. So I live and breathe this work. I love this work. I couldn't do what I do without loving it. I just work too many hours to not like it. So you will hear not only some very tangible ideas, tools, approaches that hopefully you'll be able to apply in your daily lives and your daily work, but also you'll hear a lot of real life examples, sanitized, of course, of proprietary information, but real life examples that I kind of see and I learn from on a daily basis. So let's go a little bit to the agenda. What will today's talk cover? First, we'll quickly cover the top 5 reasons why the incumbent recompetes are must-win types of contracts. And then we'll talk about why are they hard to win. And then I'll focus on the key topic of this presentation. And it's an approach, it's a methodology, and it has some tools in it. And it's called 360 performance reviews. And it's basically a methodology that helps you fight against what I call number one competitor to the incumbent recompete wins, and that's complacency. So we'll talk about that. I'll go over the process. I'll explain about some tools that we use, like voice of the team and voice of the customer. And then I'll show you how to take the data and information that you collect as part of the process and actually turn it into actionable information. A lot of what we cover today will be focused on using it during capture and proposal process, but really it's a great approach and a great methodology to use throughout the contract performance. So we'll talk about that too. How do we use that beyond the proposal? And at the very end, I'll do a little bit of an introduction of what Smart BD does for 360 reviews and a quick summary. And I promised that I would leave, I'm looking at my little watch here, I promised that I would leave about 15 minutes at the end to cover any questions. So as you guys do have questions, as I'm going along, please post them in the Q&A section of the Zoom meeting, and then I'm happy to address them at the very end. All right. So why are recompetes so important to win? So I did top 5 reasons because 5 seemed like a really good number to me. So reason number 5, keeping your loyal staff. I will tell you that the world that I live in quite a lot is services world. And for services contracts, and I believe for all contracts, but specifically for services contracts, it's all about the people, right? There's no successful program that is not empowered by people. So you have these contracts that are up and running, that are operational, your incumbent work, and you have these people that are loyal to you. They know your corporate resources, policies, procedures. Presumably they've bought into your corporate culture. You have invested quite a lot into training them and getting them to be your biggest advocates. So you want to keep these people, you want to keep them on staff. What happens a lot with federal government contracts, as most of you will know, if you lose an incumbent recompete, whoever wins it will end up capturing majority of your staff. So you don't want that to happen, obviously. Reason number 4, also very self-explanatory reason, maintaining good past performance qualifications and capabilities. Typically based on the RFP requirements, you can continue using your incumbent work, sometimes up to 5 years after it's over, sometimes up to 3 years. In rare cases, it's only 1 year after, but then you can't use it anymore. So of course you want to keep getting your incumbent work back, so you have that good base of past performance to use when you bid on new work. And speaking of building your business and getting new work, it's really important to use your current customer relationships to either organically grow the contract, or building on your current customer relationships, look for adjacent work. And again, having incumbent work really allows you to do that. Sustaining a strong ongoing revenue stream. So this is really important, and I will just show you this little graphical illustration, but really it's based on some hypothetical numbers. It's not just an illustration, it's actually based on an Excel spreadsheet and some numbers. And the key thing is reason number 1, if you cannot sustain the current contracts, the new work that you win at best will be replacing lost work, and the overall business will not grow. So I'll give you some hypothetical numbers just to kind of illustrate that. Let's say you have 100 million, and these are like very simplistic round numbers for easy demonstration. Let's say you have $100 million in revenue that you generate a year across 5 current incumbent contracts. And to make things simple, let's say they're 20 million a year each. Let's say you lose one of them, so now you're down to 80 million a year. And let's say you win new work, but new work is only $10 million a year. So now you went from $100 million a year to $90 million a year, and your overall revenue has decreased, even though you won a new contract, because you lost your incumbent recompete. So if you don't keep your incumbent recompetes, the pressure of new work is greater. Not only do you have to replace the work that you lost, but that in order to grow the business, it's that plus any new additional work that you have to win. So your incumbent recompetes must be your number 1 priority. They must be your must-win contracts above and beyond any new work that you're going after. So having said that, why are they so hard to win? Well, the number 1 reason is complacency. And complacency really is comprised of multiple parts. So the first part is contract performance. Whenever a client engages us, and whenever I come on board and we talk about that incumbent recompete, the very first question I ask is, have you delivered on all of your promises? So we all make promises in the proposal. I have a great example. I had a client that I came on, and they brought us on to help them win their incumbent recompete. And we started talking about different solutions and things. And one of the solutions was to put forth a management portal to manage the contract. And as part of our effort, I said, let's take a look at the old proposal 5 years ago. Well, guess what? They proposed a solution in that proposal 5 years ago, and that solution was to develop, design, and implement a management portal. And I said, well, wait a minute. Well, what happened? You guys never delivered on this promise. We can't put that promise again in the proposal, knowing that you've already promised it 5 years ago and didn't deliver. So immediately it made it that much harder for us to figure out how are we going to win the incumbent recompete, right? So what I recommend is when you win a contract the first time, you make a list of the book of promises that you make in the proposal, and you have to actively watch and monitor this book of promises to make sure you deliver on all of them. So when the time comes to recompete this incumbent bid, you can propose new things, and you can honestly claim success over accomplishing those things that you've proposed before. The other important thing, of course, is to do a good job throughout the contract performance and make sure the customer loves you. I always say that the secret to incumbent recompetes is a P-letter word, but it's not proposal like most people think. It's performance. If you don't have a great performance on your current contract, it becomes almost impossible to re-win it back. There is nothing you can do in the capture stages or proposal stages, virtually nothing, to help you win it back. So performance is key on incumbent recompetes. Another big enemy or big challenge or obstacle in incumbent recompetes is constant budget pressures. So within the federal government, obviously it's happening all the time. It's happening in every agency. There's no agency out there that says, hey, we have all this money, we don't know what to do with it. We don't have any budget pressures. Everybody talks about budget pressures. Well, as an incumbent, that challenge is kind of tripled because you're already performing at a certain level of cost. So, and by the way, a lot of times that information is public or semi-public, right? So, your competitors know that you're performing at this level. So, they're going to try to win this business from you. And so, they're going to try to bid below you, which drives you to say, hey, how can I do it cheaper? How can I, match their price to win, right? But it's really hard to explain. Hey, if you were, if you were doing this work for this much before, and now you're going to say that you're going to do the same work, but for less, why were you overcharging us before? It's a really hard obstacle to overcome when you're recompeting your own work. The perceived, I use the word perceived. So in some cases it's real, it's actually not perceived, but I'm trying to be hopeful, but there's always the perceived lack of an innovation. And that's a really hard obstacle to overcome too. And that's highly driven by your competitors. So as an incumbent, all of your competitors are going to be targeting you. You have a big target on your back as an incumbent. And so the first thing that they're going to be ghosting about you is, hey, they've been there for 5 years. They've been there for 10 years. They can't innovate anymore. They can't, they've already implemented whatever they had, whatever tricks they had, they've already implemented those tricks for you. Now you need somebody new, somebody with fresh ideas. This current incumbent is now out of ideas, right? And so it's hard for you to counter that ghost, to neutralize it, because if you do start proposing new innovations in your proposal going forward, the number one question is, well, why haven't you already implemented it? Why haven't you done it before? Were you holding out? So by the way, one of the tools that we use to deal with this obstacle is we try to show a progression, right, for the incumbent recompete. So in the proposal, we try to show a story that says, hey, this is what we've accomplished in the last 5 years. And growing on these accomplishments is going to allow us to continue improving and doing these new things on the following 5 years, on the new 5 years, right? And only us as an incumbent, we can continue that progression. We can continue this evolution, this evolutionary story, because anybody coming in fresh, they're going to have a learning curve, and they're not going to be able to build on the foundation we've already laid. They're going to have to rebuild their own foundation first. So that's a way to counter that obstacle. Stagnation, just inability to innovate or think out of the box. I can't tell you how many times I've interviewed the incumbent team, the actual operational contract team, and we'd say, well, hey, have you done it this way? Have you thought of that? And the first question is it's that whack-a-mole, they try to whack every idea down. No, that won't work. No, that won't work. And then, so one of the competitors will propose something like that, and the government ends up loving it. And gives them a strength for it. So it's really important to be very careful and not let your operational team sort of, whack down every idea that the proposal team may have for improvement. And finally, and to me, this is one of the biggest sort of obstacles, this false sense of security. There's another term in our business called incumbenitis. It's kind of along the lines of the same thing. But a lot of times this false sense of security is driven by inaccurate assessment of customer satisfaction. We're doing such a great job. The customer loves us. How can they possibly ever award it to anyone else? They absolutely love us. We're doing such a fantastic job. Just look at our CPARs. They're all excellent or exceptional or whatever. And I can't tell you how many incumbent recompetes I have seen lost while the contractor have had excellent CPARs as documented by the government. So that false sense of security is definitely number one contributor to complacency, which is number one enemy and obstacle to incumbent recompetes. So having said that, how do we deal with this false sense of security? How do we deal with stagnation and start thinking out of the box again? How do we create this story of evolution in our proposal to show, hey, there's a lot that we have accomplished, but we're not done yet. We're going to continue improving. We're going to continue innovating. We're going to continue finding ways via implementing new innovations to make things cheaper and more efficient for you. Therefore, we can continue to lower our price going forward, not just because it's empty promises, but it's backed by tangible, concrete ideas for innovations, automation, improvements, efficiencies, right? That's the story that you're trying to create in your proposal, which is the icing on the cake and a cherry on top. But how do you get to that story? So the number one tool in my toolbox to fight against complacency is something I call 360 program reviews. So what is that? It's a program review that's based on interviews of both your teams, your operational contract teams, as well as the customers. And it's based on an unbiased questionnaire. It's specific questions that are documented ahead of time. So you use that questionnaire to get sort of the full 360-degree truth about how things are going on the contract. And to get the 360-degree truth, it's important to not only talk to the customers, but also talk to your team. And we're going to talk about the voice of the team and the voice of the customer shortly, so I'll provide more details on that. So part of this assessment, you have to review any risks, issues, or problems. And there's a difference between issues and problems, things that have potentially not gone right, and risks. And risks are things that could still not go right? So they haven't materialized yet, but they could. It's very important to identify any improvement opportunities, right? Because those are the things that will end up being the source of your evolutionary story going forward. And it's really important to independently validate program status. So this independent validation is really key to 360 program review assessment. And the reason for that is, obviously your contracts team, your operational team should be constantly doing validation of program status, right? They have weekly status reviews, usually a monthly status reviews, a monthly program reviews. They do reports, right, of all kinds. All that is ongoing throughout, but they don't have that independent view anymore, right? They're too emotionally invested in this program. Sometimes they don't see the forest beyond the trees, right? Or the trees beyond the forest. So this independent validation is really important. It can be done in multiple ways. You can bring in, if you have a larger company, you can bring in somebody from a different part of the company to present themselves as an independent third party, right? Aside from the operational team, some companies do that as part of their quality assessments. That's another good way of doing that. Some companies bring in an independent third party completely and say, hey, it's a different company. They're looking at us. They're giving us their neutral, independent view, but ultimately we're doing it to help you, government customer, because we want to do a better job for you. So what happens during this assessment? I told you we're going to talk about the voice of the customer in just a few minutes, and we will. You engage your customer in conversations, and I've personally run these assessments quite a few times, and there's a really cool, interesting effect that happens. The first thing is they feel good. They're like, oh, you really care. You do want to improve. You do care about our satisfaction. You do care about the quality of performance. This is really cool. Nobody has come and done this independent assessment before. Nobody has come and talked to us before. So they start getting engaged in the conversation in ways that they have not before. And they start feeling that corporately, right, from the corporate perspective, not just from their operational team perspective. The company really cares about their needs and desires and future, et cetera, et cetera. The very important outcome of the assessment should be a complete set of recommendations and a plan of actions, right? So just to collect data is not good enough. You have to take the data and transform it into actionable information. And as part of this presentation, I will show you how we do it and the tools that we've built to do it. And there are different things that could happen. So from the proposal perspective, this could be input into themes, into discriminators, into innovations, ultimately resulting in strengths, because that is what the government evaluators use to score the proposal and to ultimately award the winning bid with. So those are the things that you're targeting: themes, discriminators, innovations, strengths, improvement ideas, right? But ultimately, as part of this process, we talked about the customer engagement. The process itself demonstrates your corporate commitment to continuous improvement, right? So not only does it result in tangible set of ideas of things to put in your proposal that could be strengths that could show that evolution, right? But in the proposal itself, you could say, hey, and by the way, Mr. Customer or Miss Customer, we conduct this annual, semi-annual, twice, during the program period performance assessment as part of our continuous improvement opportunities. And it's different from any other competitor that how they do things. This is our way of making sure, this independent assessment is our way of making sure that we're listening to you and we're giving you this, we're getting this neutral, assessment of how we're doing and what we can do better. All right, so here's the overall process. So the first thing we do is we conduct what I call voice of the team. And again, we're going to talk about the voice of the team very shortly. And the second thing is we create a customer map. And a customer map is really important. A customer map is very similar to, if you work captures, it's called a customer call plan. It's similar but different. So you start out with a customer organization, right? The organization that's important to this particular bid or program. And then you start highlighting it. And the highlights are priorities, right? So you have, not all customers are created equal. And all customers are important in certain ways, but if you're working on the recompete specifically, let's target that particular situation first, then you have some customers that are more important. And those are the customers that are potentially going to be on the source evaluation board or the technical evaluation panel. Those are going to be making the specific decisions with regards to who gets to win the bid, the award itself. They're very important. You have your influencers. Maybe they're not serving on the source evaluation board, but they're going to influence, this competition, whether they're higher level and they'll drive their direction down, or maybe they're consultants and they'll provide their technical evaluation inputs, right? So you kind of have to highlight your customer organization with regards to who are the people important to this bid, to this recompete, and you have to target those people first. Then you conduct the voice of the customer, and that's basically a set of meetings. And again, we'll cover that in more detail in a minute on the next slide. So I'll talk about what the voice of the customer is. And so once you conduct the VOT and the VOC, you end up with a whole collection of data, a whole collection of notes, documented notes, right? And it's really important to document things, and we'll talk about that as well. So once you end up with this collection of notes, all this is great, but again, it's just data. To turn it into actionable information, you have to analyze the results. And I'll show you a tool in a few slides down that we use, that we've developed, that we use to analyze those results, to actually see trends. It helps you do a trend analysis, and the trend analysis helps you prioritize issues so that you understand what issues are more important and what issues are less important. And based on the most important issues, you have to develop a set of recommendations. And those recommendations could be things like corporate investments. It could be things like innovations to propose in the proposal, right? And then based on that, you can develop proposal artifacts, such as a list of strengths and benefits, a list of corporate investments that will go into the proposal, that evolutionary map that we can show things accomplished versus things planned to build on the foundation of those accomplishments. So that is the overall process. All right, so I promised that we'll talk in more detail about what is the voice of the team and the voice of the customer, and this is the slide. So we've done voice of the customer for a really long time. And voice of the customer, a lot of you do it, maybe you don't even call it that. You know, good capture practices always talk about, you know, doing customer calls, doing a customer contact plan, all those things. So all that is part of essentially the voice of the customer. But very few people do the voice of the team. And the voice of the team is similar but different. So your team, especially your managers, your leads, your program manager, those are the people that spend the most time with your customer. You know, before COVID started, they would be the people that would go to lunch with all your customers, hopefully once in a while, maybe meet up for coffee, see them in the hallways, right? So they understand the customer the best, right? So, and they have their internal view about how things are going. And maybe your team is not happy about certain things. So maybe your team is looking for some improvements. And maybe your team is feeding those ideas to the customer. And if things aren't going 100% smoothly, they may be even saying things like, oh, my company could really do this better. And you don't want them saying these things and not noticing and not doing something about that, right? So the very first thing is to set up a series of meetings with your team, right? And I'm not talking about every single person on the contract. If you have a 300-person contract, that's going to go on forever. But you want to identify key people. Usually it's the management team. You want to meet with a couple of technical leads. You want to meet with some people that are in charge of critical areas. You want to meet with people that are more vocal. You want to meet with people that have good customer relationships. They're very outgoing, good people's people. They're the ones that are gonna be better communicators and give you the best information about the program. You should develop a questionnaire ahead of time, and the questionnaire should be fairly neutral, unbiased. And the questionnaire serves as the basis for the interview. When you're doing your voice of the team, that's when it's a good time to jointly develop the customer map we just talked about in the previous slide. And the customer map will prepare you for the voice of the customer. And the very important point is that whatever, all the notes should be thoroughly documented. It's really, really important. What we don't document, we tend to forget. And what we forget and don't document will not end up into that actionable information that we talked about before. Once you complete your voice of the team sessions, the next thing is to schedule your voice of the customer. So you have your customer map prioritized, and then that should serve as a basis for your action plan and scheduling the meetings with the customers. And because you're the incumbent and they know you, and you're couching at, you know, this is part of our continuous improvement initiatives. We have this, you know, independent assessment. They should absolutely want to meet with you as part of that. So again, you have a questionnaire, slightly different, more targeted to the customer base, but it's a set questionnaire, so you're not just going in there, so how are things going? Great, fantastic, right? And then all notes from interviews should be documented in detailed contact reports, and that's also a very important part. And finally, a very critical aspect for successful voice of the team, voice of the customer, is an experienced facilitator. So I talked about it's important to have these questionnaires prepared ahead of time. So it kind of guides, that provides an agenda for these conversations. Well, the other thing it provides, you should think about, some of the questions are very basic and very generic. How are things going on the current contract? What are the things that you think are going well, and what are the areas that you think will, could use some improvements, and what are your ideas for how we can improve, right? So those are some basic generic questions. But then, a lot of times the customers will say, hey, well, things are going great. They're doing such a great job. I honestly can't think of anything they could do better. And I've dealt with situations like that too. So you want to put some kind of like mind-provoking questions on the questionnaire as well, right? So I like to ask things like, you have a crystal ball and you can see 5 years ahead, and then you're looking back on the 5 years that passed. What is your definition of success? What types of things have gone really well? Why and how? And so that kind of drives to their desires and needs, and that makes them, that's a much more thought-provoking question than just asking, hey, what are your future needs and desires and wishes, right? But having an experienced facilitator is really important, because once you get into the first question, right, once you ask this big, broad question, you need to kind of look at the person you're interviewing. You need to watch their body language, and you need to start pulling on some threads and putting in impromptu mini questions, right, to start digging deeper in some of the things that they say, right? You need to pick up on the areas where maybe they're hesitating to come out with a lot of detail, and start pulling on those threads. And it takes a very experienced facilitator to do that. So it's important. You can't just, send your junior intern with a questionnaire so that they can fill out the answers. It's important to couple, a specific questionnaire with an experienced facilitator. All right, so you do the voice of the customer, you do the voice of the team, you document well, right? Because that's a really important part. Now, you should have, some people do 20, 30, 40 meetings. Now you have all these customer call reports, all these, team call reports. What do you do with all this data, right? How do you turn it into actionable information? So what we've done as an example, right, and you can come up with your own. This is just an example of sort of like our experience, what we've done. We actually built an Excel-based tool using pivot tables. And so the first thing we do is we analyze the data. So we take the voice of the customer as an example. And the first part of analysis is manual analysis. We pick out keywords, right? And turn them into HUD buttons. And then we have a list of HUD buttons and issues as an example, right? So let's say things like, training is a HUD button, having whatever, some issues around training came up. So each time there's an issue or an improvement opportunity or a discussion point around training, we attribute it to the training HUD button, right? And let's say another HUD button is, reach back to corporate facilities or something like that, right? So that would be like another HUD button. And then for each of the HUD buttons, we count how many mentions, how many times it was mentioned in the report, in the documented notes. So you group, sometimes you group the HUD buttons into themes. So if you have a lot of HUD buttons, for example, around recruiting and training and things like that, there's definitely a thematic about the workforce development and the staffing issues, and that would be like a bigger overarching theme. And then you have to develop a set of solutions that specifically directly map to customer feedback. So I want to pause here and talk a little bit about how we weigh things. So I mentioned each time a HUD button is mentioned or attributed to in the customer call report, we give it a score, right? And usually, to make things simple, we give it 1 point. But then we start tweaking it because not all customers are created equal. We talked about that. We talked about the customer map. So your customer map should be color coded, whichever the color palette that you choose to use. But some customers are potentially more important only because they may be your source evaluation board members or specifically tied to this, to the competition and to the evaluation of your proposals. So you really want to give them a bigger voice. You want to hear what they have to say, and what they say is a little bit more important than what everybody else has to say. So those customers may get, score 3 instead of score 1 for each time they mention a HUD button in their report. And then you have your influencers or your consultants, the people that may feed into the evaluation, but not exactly directly be a part of the evaluation. Maybe they get 2 points for each time something is mentioned. And so then you add up all of the scores, and that helps you prioritize your HUD buttons. And you actually use data as opposed to, subjective, human feelings and emotions applied on top of the customer data. You actually use objective data and say, hey, this is definitely a higher level HUD button, a higher level thematic that's coming out of this analysis than this. And it's interesting to watch that because I've kind of, for my own sort of entertainment purposes, I've kind of tried to get people to verbally describe things that are important to the customers after talking to them. And then I would use the tool and see if what people think is important to their customers aligns with what the data shows. And I will tell you, there are lots of times when it did not align quite properly, where people thought something was more important than other thing, but in reality it was quite the opposite based on how many times people mentioned the other thing and based on who mentioned the other thing. So that's why this sort of like point-based analysis is very valuable, in my opinion, because it clearly shows trends. And then the tools that we've created, actually, like I said, it lets you do these pivot tables and shows you these graphical interfaces, and you can see, hey, this is the split up by different customer groups. Like, if, for example, you can categorize your customers. This is what's important to their contract shop versus this is what's important to their technical customers. This is what's important to the SEB members or potential SEB members. This is what's important to the actual technical monitors and task monitors that will be working with our folks on day-to-day basis. So you can categorize things and slice and dice and see different views of that data, which makes it helpful as well. So once you have the set of the HUD buttons and you have them prioritized and you make some decisions as far as, which ones you want to develop solutions for, and solutions can be multiple things. As I mentioned before, it can be things that you propose in your proposal going forward. It can be corporate investments that you invest in right now as this competition is going on or about to go on, because there are certain things you can fix right now and show the customer progress right now, as opposed to having them wait another year until after the contract is awarded. And that goes a long way. Okay. So once you actually get the request for proposal, once you get their RFP and you look at the RFP requirements, the next big thing to do is you collected your customer HUD buttons during your capture processes, you've developed some solutions. Well, now you have to showcase those solutions, those themes in your proposal. And once you have the RFP, you have to map it to the RFP requirements in different sections to make sure you can get scored and you can get credit for those. And finally, the other really good useful area where we use this tool is a checklist during color reviews. We actually show this tool during color reviews to reviewers and say, these are all the customer HUD buttons by priority. These are the solutions we've developed against the customer HUD buttons. Please use this as a checklist to make sure that this information, that this work that's done by the capture team has now translated to the proposal and is captured on paper. Because if it's not captured on paper, the evaluators won't be able to give you credit for it, and you won't get credit in your proposals. Okay, so let's talk about what do we do with this beyond the proposal? So hopefully at this point, you guys kind of have had a little bit of a view into how this could be a good, useful proposal tool to help you win your incumbent recompetes. But in reality, this goes way beyond the proposals. I actually have customers who use it as a continuous improvement tool on the contract itself. I had a scenario where we started using that on a customer for one of my big customers, actually big companies, and they used it on their incumbent recompete, and their customer, the government customer, loved it so much they said, hey, I love that you're doing this. This is so great. We'd like for you to come back in a couple of years again and do it again. And we ended that meeting and we said, I guess they're thinking that we're going to be here a couple of years from now. That's got to be a good sign for an incumbent recompete. And so that's what they did. They re-won the recompete, and they made one of their promises in their proposal was to do this 360 program performance review every 2 years on their contract. So this is a great continuous improvement tool that you can actually implement on the contract as part of, like I said, your ongoing operations. It's something that's great to tout in your proposal that you will do this during the contract period of performance as well. And it really helps with that customer engagement and continuous improvement and your overall story, of continuous improvement. All right, so I'll go through this really quickly and open it up for questions. We're almost at 10:45 or Eastern time, which gives us 15 minutes left for questions. Like I mentioned, we have a set of services. We actually provide the independent, unbiased third-party reviews. We have some templates that we've built. And this slide, use it as an informational slide. I'm not trying to impose or sell our processes or templates or tools, but use this list of templates that we've built. If you want to, you have some choices if you want to implement that at corporate level within your company and just do this as an independent review within your company itself. But you should build these templates, right? Because they really help you in the process. Doing this process without the rigorous templates and the proper facilitators will not produce the same set of results. So what we built is, first we have the pre-built questionnaires. Then we have the customer map tool that I mentioned that you color code your customers based on priority. The detailed contact reports, we have a form for that, but the main thing is, if you don't have a form, the main thing is just to document those contact reports in as much detail as possible. I showed you a little bit of a screenshot on the previous slide of our graphical analysis tool, and like I said, you can use Excel. You can go more fancier if you have a great IT department and software developers who can help you with that. The idea is you need a tool that will help you analyze the information, and the more analysis you can apply to show it easier graphically, the more aha moments, and trust me, you will have aha moments when you look at it as far as data is concerned, as opposed to applying sort of like your own emotional lens on top of it, because we're all humans, we all have that lens, right? But what we really need is customer perspective, right? And those analysis tools, they really help you get to the unbiased, straight up customer perspective. You want to ultimately, at the end of the process, if you're doing it, whether you're doing it like midstream during the contract, or in preparation for the incumbent recompete closer to the proposal time, you want to present a set of actionable recommendations and a set of deliverables. These are the improvement opportunities, these are corporate investment opportunities, that type of thing. And if you are using it as a proposal tool, you want to map it to your themes. You want to create solutions that will lead to strengths and ultimately map it to the proposal sections. So you want to have that mapping. You want to have some type of a mapping tool that helps you map those things. So in summary, I hope that this presentation got some of your thoughts and ideas sort of flowing and gave you some takeaways that you can bring back to your companies, back and help you win your incumbent recompetes. Make them your priority. Definitely fight incumbenitis. Listen to your customers. It really pays off They are the main reason we're all in business. So they are the most important reason, right, for us to make sure they're happy. And hopefully you saw 360 independent performance reviews is a great tool, not only for the recompete and for proposals purposes, but also for continuous improvement during contract performance. So with that said, this is my contact information. If anybody has any follow-on questions beyond this presentation and wants to talk about anything, please do not hesitate to reach out. We'll make the slides available, and I think this recording will be available online to anyone who wants to go through this again or who has not had a chance to tune in live and wants to watch this or hear this or look at the slides offline later. With that said, I think there's at least one question in the Q&A. I'll open it up for any Q&As.
Thank you, Marina. I think guys, please do add in the chat box. I love this presentation. If you do, please add it in the chat. So question, I think there were a few questions, Marina, I think, and I had similar questions. Let me start with Jen. Hope I pronounce your name, Jenny. Jenny asked a very fundamental question, which is like, when do you establish the 360-degree recompete team to begin preparing for the recompete? That's the first one.
Okay, good question. So if you're purely doing it for the purposes of the incumbent recompete purposes and the proposal, right, I would say approximately a year before your recompete, you think your RFP will come out. And the reason for that is you don't want to do it, first of all, the customers get a little nervous about talking to people about things the closer it gets to the RFP timeframe. And you don't want them to think that you only care because the recompete's coming up, right? So the earlier you do it, the better. And it also gives you runway, that year runway, to implement any improvements on the contract, should you identify any. So I would say about a year out if you're only doing it once for the proposal purposes. But as I talked about, later on in my presentation, I think it's really helpful to do it at least a couple of times during period of performance. So it's an ongoing thing. And again, it really makes the customers feel like you care about continuous improvement and what's important to them, and not just because you're trying to win your recompete back.
Nice, thank you. And the follow-up question from that, Marina, which is like, who should be part of the recompete team? I think, do you include a fresh independent team, or do you also include the current contract team part of the project recompete?
Yeah, so I assume it's asking about who should be conducting these 360 assessments. And if that's the question, so as I mentioned, they really should be done independently. So usually even a single facilitator of those is fine. You don't need to have a big team. In fact, you don't want to go into a customer meeting or even your team, like your team interview with a big team of people, because that happens, that tends to actually kind of overwhelm whoever you're interviewing. So I prefer to do it with a single facilitator. I prefer that facilitator to be an independent person, again, either coming from a whole different, side of the big corporate company, maybe part of the quality assurance group or some other independent neutral group, or hiring an independent third party that does these assessments. As I mentioned, we do it, but there are other companies out there that do it as well. Bring them in. Usually a single facilitator, as long as they're experienced and sort of senior level and have done this before, is sufficient in terms of who does the VOC and the VOT, and then analyzes, you can have one or two people analyze the data in the background.
Perfect. Thank you, Marina. I think the question was slightly broader than, okay, after this 360-degree reviews are done, when you go for the recompete team or the rebid team as such, do you include the contract team, or do you just have a fresh perspective on this rebid, taking the inputs and then going for the renewal bid, the bid team?
Okay, so during you get your team perspective as part of the voice of the team, and the voice of the team is when you interview your managers that run the contract, so you get their perspective as well. Once you go beyond the 360 review and you have your set of recommendations, the actual capture teams may vary greatly, right? It really depends. It depends on how big the contract that you're going after recompeting. It depends on how big the company you work for. I've seen captures done by a single capture manager, and I've seen captures done at large companies for large contracts with a very large capture team of 10 to 15 people upwards. So it really depends on the situation. And I hate to answer a question with the words "it depends," but it really does depend.
Totally, Marina. Thank you. I think that was useful. Marina, when we talk about customer reviews, how do we identify who are the customers that we need to be, reaching out for this 360-degree reviews?
Great question. So that's the customer, that's developing that customer map that I mentioned. And so let's start with, if we're doing it for the recompete purposes specifically, then what you really want to do is try to understand who will be your biggest players, so to speak, in the recompete and decision makers, right? And so you want to identify those customers who will potentially be a part of the source evaluation board or technical evaluation panel. And you want to include both from the contract shop decision makers as well as your technical customer decision makers. Then, as I mentioned, you want to go the next step priority beyond that, any influencers, perhaps the managers of people who will be on the source evaluation board, perhaps any technical folks that have valuable knowledge, right, that will be consultants, infusing their ideas into the source evaluation board. So for the proposal purposes, you want that customer map to be more focused on customers that will be engaged with the recompete, with the competition. If you don't know who that is quite yet, you want to think about your key technical customers. Like if it's a task order based contract, perhaps you look at different task monitors or task managers on the customer side. And then you look at the division leads as well, depending on how the customer is organized. And then again, you want to look at the contract shop, right? Usually you want to include this contracting officer and the contracting officer's representative in that list as well. So if it's for ongoing basis, just during the contract performance, I would say all of your key customers that interface, whether they're like the government program managers or the government project managers, the key customers that give you direction on the day-to-day basis and interface with the contract the most, those are the ones that you want to include on the list.
Perfect, Marina. And again, if we look, many companies also conduct their own net promoter score surveys and other surveys that might happen as a standard corporate procedures. And very early on, we found a comment that the customer loves us. When we do this independent 360-degree reviews, and when it kind of contradicts or kind of goes away from what the traditional corporate reviews kinds of tells you about our relationship with the customer, have you come across that sort of contradictions? If so, how can we kind of ensure that that's separate and this separate and manage expectations within?
So are we talking about instances where the customer loves us and we still end up and we don't get any more actionable information, or we end up losing the contract anyway? Is that the question?
And if you look, most companies have their customer experience team, right? So the corporate team that sits within their marketing or sales or something, and they do customer experience surveys. And then they do come with an annual things of, okay, our net promoter score is 74 plus 74, these customers love us, etc. So while that sort of reports comes up for various reasons, and here we are, 360-degree reviews, much more fact-based, interview-based, etc. Sometimes those don't go in parallel. So we might say the chances of you renewing is very low, your customer hate you, whereas those guys might say, oh, look, it's plus 74, our customer love us. Have you seen any contradictions while you're doing that? And that was the aha moment for the companies. Oh my God, we thought they love you, but now because of this, we realize that they don't actually like us.
Yeah, so I have. I mean, this is what we do, right? So there are a lot of aha moments, right? So I would say the two sets of aha moments was, the first set is like, the customer loves us, we're doing a great job, right? And I would be interviewing a customer and they would start by, I want to start by saying they're doing an incredible job. They're doing such a great job. I really can't think of anything that we can improve on, right? And then you start putting in some of the thought-provoking questions, and they'd be like, well, that now that you said that, I do think, let me talk to you about training a little bit. People are complaining that they're not getting enough training or whatever, right? So we definitely have uncovered issues where we come back and be like, oh, did you know about that? And did you know about that? And they did not know, right? And again, I think part of it is the secret sauces to getting to that next level of, right? Because there's always something you can improve on. There's always something. And so the number one thing is like, don't just take that as a given. Oh, they love us. There's nothing we can do better. Like that is your number one enemy. Don't buy into that at all. Like if you're thinking that, you're on the wrong path, right? So, but the two other thing is, again, independence, right? If you're sending in corporate people that will be perceived as part of your BD group or your sales group, the customers are not going to give you the same level of feedback and input and openness as if they think, okay, they've engaged a third party, right? Either corporate or external. They're totally neutral, but they're really doing that because they care about us and they want to implement improvements. And this nuance is really, really important with regards to getting that next level of information. So that's definitely a secret sauce. And the second part of that secret sauce, like I said, is having an experienced facilitator who can put the interviewee at ease, with some opening remarks, but then also get to that next level, keep pulling on the threads, get to that next level of information, think on their feet, and improv some very important follow-on questions.
Nice. I think that makes a lot of sense. I know we are running slightly late, but let me ask one last question before I go for Scribble Quest. Please do stand until 1 or 2 minutes, and then we'll get together. I think there was a brilliant question from Joshua, which is like, how can you encourage stakeholders, like operational stakeholders, to incorporate the feedback or the pointers that the proposal teams have done? And then on the other side, the operations people, whatever they have done, how can we bring it back into the proposal submissions? I think it's a long question. Which said, what can BD teams do to get the stakeholders, senior leadership, and operation to manage the promises? Because he has got experiences where that's not being done.
So the senior leadership, the corporate buy-in is key, right? So, and it's honestly, it's the premise of this success. If you don't have the corporate senior leadership buy-in, this will not be successful, because ultimately this will result in ideas that will require the corporation to invest time, money, and effort, right, on improvement opportunities. So if your company does not believe, right, in continuous improvement and corporate investments, this will not be successful. This is just a non-starter, right? The only thing you can do to sort of turn that kind of culture around, if that is the culture, is, really show, right, some hypothetical numbers. If you lose all this work, if you're not interested in continuous improvement, and you lose all this work, it will be that much harder to rebuild your pipeline, right? Because those people, typically, they're number-driven people. And again, I think the tool that shows the data graphically also helps these types of people understand the value, because now you're showing data, and it's not just anecdotal stories, and you have names behind the data and numbers of mentions of things and things like that. So I think it's this combination of data gathering, but then showing this information in a graphical way, that's a data-driven quantitative way, is what typically proves to the corporate, to the leadership, that these things are important. And then they need to want to help the customers and implement some initiatives. Like I mentioned, the training initiative once, like that was a tangible thing that came out, and the company invested money, their own, profit, out-of-pocket profit money, into providing training to their people. And that is something that's definitely was requested by the customers. And it's not something they could do as part of an official formal request, but it came up, right? So that was one example. But the corporate leadership had to want to implement that initiative and spend money on that initiative. And if they don't, then it's just not going to work.
Perfect. Thank you, Marina. As you rightly pointed, end of the day, you could do the review, but if the actions are not being implemented, then that's not the point. But thank you for a good presentation. And I'm going to use, you saw all the love and support in the chat. But let's officially enter the Scribble Quiz. Let's see who attentive people, because I know that you will be found out very soon. So question number 1, get close to your chat. People who have joined our Scribble Quiz all the time, If you participate, you get a point. If you get the answer right, you get 3 points, and all your points get added. So, question number 1. Marina mentioned there is a P letter word that always wins the recompete. What's the P letter word? Ooh, ooh. Oh no. Oh no. It's not the proposal. So Barbara and Nicole, nice work. Joshua, nice work. So good try, Mandy, James. So it's performance. So performance drives the recompete. So wins the recompete. So there, while Marina was talking about the 5 challenges, she pointed out, how the 5 challenges are effective. There was a quote there, and the quote said, "Success breeds complacency, and complacency breeds failure. Only the dash dash survives." What was that gap? Only the dash survive. Oh my God, you guys are too attentive. My God, Barbara, Nicole, you are becoming a legend now. Thank you. See, Marina, they do listen. Nice work. It's me who didn't then. Nice
I'm
work.
impressed. I'm impressed for sure.
Exactly. So there were 5 reasons why recompetes must win. So Marina talked about the first reason was, you know what, guys, if you don't win recompete, then your new work replaces the old work. The second reason was it's important for you to sustain ongoing revenue. The third one was customer relationships. What was the 4th and the 5th reason why recompetes are must win? Oh my God, Barbara, are you sure? Yes, past performance, staff, past performance, good performance, loyal staff. Yeah, I think, everybody tried, everybody got this answer. I mean, it's good because while I was typing notes, I missed it, but you got the answer. That's it. And that's the end of Scribble Quiz. Obviously, we accumulate the points. Hope you enjoyed it. Thank you, Marina, for joining. Next week is BPC Dallas. Hopefully, I'll see some of you there. If you are in there, let me know. Drop me a message. We'd love to meet you. We'll come back again on the 31st of May. 31st of May, we will be hosting Catherine Morgan, and we will be talking about storyboarding for success. So the slides, the webinars, and the recording will be sent out to you. Please do reach out to Marina. If you have a recompete, pick her brains of how you are doing and how she can help you to do it 100%. One tip might help you to save a recompete. And when a recompete saves, obviously lots of livelihoods get saved as well. That's it from me. Thank you for joining the Scribble Office webinar. Sorry, we slightly overran by 5 minutes. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks again, Marina. Thanks everybody for joining. And look after yourself. Stay healthy. Stay happy. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining. Have a great day.